You're standing in a crowded parking lot outside a downtown sports bar on a Friday night. The air is thick with tension, alcohol, and bad decisions waiting to happen. Four large men, each one bigger than a linebacker, are surrounding what appears to be an easy target, a woman who barely reaches their shoulders, wearing simple jeans and a black jacket. They're laughing, making crude jokes, moving closer with each passing second. Then she speaks. Her voice is calm, almost gentle. Stop while you can. The laughter gets louder. One of them mimics her voice in a high-pitched tone. Another cracks his knuckles. They think they've found the perfect victim for their twisted idea of fun. But here's what they don't know, what nobody in that parking lot knows, is that they're about to witness something that will be talked about for years. Something that will make them question everything they thought they knew about strength, skill, and what happens when predators pick the wrong prey. In exactly 30 seconds, four grown men will be on the ground, disarmed, humiliated, and completely shocked by what just happened to them. This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie scene. This is the true story of Sarah Chun, a woman whose quiet warning became the last mistake for criminals ever made. A story that proves sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Are you ready to discover what happens when bullies meet someone who's been waiting her whole life for this moment? Sarah Chun had never planned for her Friday night to end with four men unconscious in a parking lot. But life had taught her that plans rarely survive contact with reality. She sat in her small Honda Civic outside Murphy's sports bar, engine off, windows slightly cracked to lead in the cool October air. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m., and she was already running late for what should have been a simple pickup. Her younger brother Danny had called 3 hours earlier, his voice shaky and embarrassed. He'd gone out with college friends to celebrate midterm exams being over, had too much to drink, and now needed a ride home. Sarah had been in the middle of grading papers for her high school chemistry classes when the call came. She could have said no, could have told him to call an Uber or ask one of his buddies for help. But Danny was the only family she had left, and she made a promise to their parents before they died that she'd always look out for him. The parking lot was busier than she'd expected for a Thursday night. Groups of people moved between cars, their voices carrying across the asphalt in waves of laughter and conversation. Most seemed harmless enough: college students, young professionals, people just trying to blow off steam after a long week. But Sarah's training had taught her to notice details others missed. The way people moved, how they held themselves, which ones were looking for trouble and which ones were trying to avoid it. She'd been sitting for maybe 10 minutes when she spotted Danny through the bar's large front windows. He was standing near the entrance, swaying slightly as he talked to two friends she recognized from his dorm. Good. He was where he said he'd be, and he looked ready to leave. Sarah pulled out her phone to text him that she was here. That's when she heard the voices. "Look what we got here, boys." The voice was loud, slurred with alcohol, and carried the kind of aggressive tone that made people cross the street. Sarah looked up from her phone to see four men walking between the cars about 50 feet away. They were big men, the kind who'd probably played football in high school and spent their 20s convinced that size and loudness were the same thing as strength. The one doing the talking had short brown hair and wore a Letterman jacket that looked too small for his frame. His three friends flanked him like a pack, moving with the predatory confidence of people who'd never been seriously challenged. They were heading toward a woman who was walking alone to her car. Sarah recognized the setup immediately. She'd seen it countless times during her years in the military, and later as a civilian contractor in places where such things happened every night. 4 against 1. Isolated location. Plenty of alcohol to blur judgment and memory. The woman, she looked to be in her early 20s, blonde hair, short dress, heels that would make running difficult, was exactly the kind of target these men were looking for. The woman had noticed him too. Sarah could see her pace quicken, her purse clutched tighter against her body. She was heading for a blue sedan parked in a poorly lit corner of the lot. Even from a distance, Sarah could read the fear in her body language, the way her shoulders tensed, how she kept glancing back over her shoulder. She knew she was in trouble, but she was trying not to show it. "Hey, sweetheart," the leader called out, his voice echoing across the parking lot. Were you going in such a hurry? The woman didn't answer. She increased her pace, but her heels made it awkward. She was maybe 30 feet from her car now, but the four men were closing the distance fast. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always came before action. She'd been out of the service for 6 years now, working as a high school teacher, living a quiet life. But some instincts never died. Some training never faded. And some lines, once crossed, demanded a response. She opened her car door and stepped out. The cool night air hit her face as she stood beside her Honda, taking in the scene with the calm assessment that had kept her alive in Afghanistan and Iraq. Four men, all between 6 feet and 6'3", probably weighing between 200 and 250 pounds each. The leader was clearly drunk, but not stumbling drunk. His 3 friends were following his lead, which meant they weren't thinking for themselves. That was good. Groups that followed blindly were predictable. The woman had reached her car and was fumbling with her keys. Her hands were shaking now, and Sarah could hear the metallic jingle of the keychain from across the parking lot. She was scared, really scared. Come on, don't be like that. The leader continued, now close enough that Sarah could see his face clearly. He had small eyes and a weak chin, the kind of features that suggested a lifetime of taking what he wanted through intimidation rather than earning it. We just want to talk. Maybe buy you a drink. I have to go, the woman said, her voice barely audible. She'd found the right key, but couldn't get it into the lock. Her hands were trembling too much. That's when one of the other men, a redhead with arms covered in tattoos, moved around behind her, blocking her path to the driver's side door. Nobody said you could leave yet, he said with a grin that made Sarah's jaw tighten. Sarah started walking toward them. She moved at a steady pace, neither hurried nor casual, just a woman crossing a parking lot. She kept her hands visible and relaxed at her sides. Her footsteps were silent on the asphalt despite her boots, a skill learned during night patrols in hostile territory, where noise meant death. The four men were so focused on their target that they didn't notice her approach until she was about 20 feet away. The woman saw her first, hope flashing her eyes for just a moment before fear took over again. She probably thought Sarah was just another witness who would keep walking, maybe call the police once she was safely in her own car. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. "Is everything okay here?" The four men turned to look at her, and Sarah saw their expressions shift from annoyance to amusement. She knew what they were seeing, a woman in her early 30s, maybe 5'5" in boots, wearing dark jeans and a black jacket. No visible weapons. No backup. Just another woman for them to intimidate. "Everything's fine, lady," the leader said, his tone dismissive. "This doesn't concern you. Keep walking." Sarah stopped about 10 feet away from them. Close enough to act, far enough to assess. She could see all four clearly now. The leader was drunk, but coordinated. The redhead behind the victim was the most aggressive. He'd be the first to escalate to violence. The other two were hanging back slightly, followers rather than leaders. They'd be dangerous in a group, but less confident on their own. "I think she wants to leave," Sarah said, nodding toward the blonde woman. "Maybe you should let her." The leader laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Maybe you should mind your own business before you get hurt. I'm just asking you to step back and let her go to her car. And what if we don't?" This came from the redhead. He'd moved away from the blonde woman and was now facing Sarah directly. "What exactly are you going to do about it?" Sarah looked at each of them in turn, her expression unchanged. She'd been in this situation before, in different places with different stakes. Sometimes talking worked, sometimes it didn't, but she always gave them the chance to walk away. "I'm asking nicely," she said. "Please step back and leave her alone." The four men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw the moment when their decision was made. It was something in their eyes, a shared understanding that they weren't going to be intimidated by a single woman, no matter how politely she asked. The leader stepped closer. "You know what, sweetheart? Maybe you can join the party. Two's always better than one, right, boys?" His friends laughed, and Sarah knew that talking time was over. She'd given them their chance. She'd asked nicely. She tried to resolve this without violence. But Some people only understood one language, and these four had just told her which language they spoke. "Stop while you can," she said, her voice still calm, but with something new underneath it. Something that should have warned them. Something that might have saved them if they'd been smart enough to listen. Instead, they laughed harder. The leader reached out to grab her arm, and Sarah Chun, former Army Ranger, veteran of 3 tours in Afghanistan, expert in 17 different forms of combat, decided that her quiet Friday night was officially over. What happened next would be discussed and debated for years afterward. Witnesses would struggle to explain it. Security cameras would capture it, but somehow make it look impossible. Police reports would read like fiction. But in that moment, as 4 predators closed in on what they thought were easy prey, Sarah Chun simply smiled and prepared to teach them the difference between picking on someone and picking a fight with someone who had spent years learning to end fights permanently. The blonde woman by the car would later tell reporters that she knew something had changed in that instant. Something in the air itself, like the moment before lightning strikes. The 4 men felt it too, she said, but they misunderstood what it meant. They thought it meant they were about to get what they wanted. They had no idea how wrong they were. The leader's hand was 6 inches from Sarah's arm when muscle memory took over. Years of training compressed into a single fluid motion that started with a simple step to the right and ended with 240 pounds of drunk aggression face down on the asphalt. Sarah had grabbed his wrist with her left hand while her right arm came up under his elbow, applying pressure in a direction the joint wasn't designed to bend. At the same time, she'd hooked her right leg behind his left knee and used his forward momentum to send him sprawling. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds, and she'd done it so smoothly that the other 3 men were still processing what they'd seen when their leader hit the ground with a grunt of pain and surprise. "Tommy!" the redhead shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "What the hell?" Tommy was trying to push himself up, his right arm hanging at an awkward angle. Sarah had dislocated his shoulder, not permanently, but enough to take him out of the fight. He rolled onto his back, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock and pain. "I warned you," Sarah said quietly. She'd moved into a balanced stance, weight evenly distributed, hands loose at her sides. To an untrained eye, she looked relaxed. To someone who knew what to look for, she looked like a coiled spring ready to explode in any direction. The remaining 3 men spread out slightly, forming a rough semicircle around her. They were still confident it was 3 against 1, and Tommy had probably just slipped or something. Women didn't take down men like Tommy. That wasn't how the world worked. "You got lucky," the redhead snarled. He was the biggest of the 4, with thick arms and a neck like a tree trunk. Tribal tattoos covered his forearms, and a scar ran from his left ear to his jaw. But luck runs out. He came at her straight on, no finesse, just brute force and anger. A right cross aimed at her head with enough power to knock out a heavyweight boxer. Sarah ducked under the punch, stepped inside his guard, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. The redhead's breath exploded out of him in a whoosh of beer and barbecue sauce. He doubled over, gasping, and Sarah brought her knee up to meet his descending face. The impact was sharp and final. He dropped like a marionette with cut strings. 2 down. The blonde woman by the car had stopped fumbling with her keys. She was staring at Sarah with an expression of absolute amazement, her mouth slightly open. Around the parking lot, other people were starting to notice the commotion. A few had pulled out cell phones, but nobody was moving to interfere. The 2 remaining attackers were having second thoughts. Sarah could see it in their body language, the way they glanced at each other, the slight backward steps they were taking. The confidence was gone, replaced by confusion and the first stirrings of real fear. "Look, lady," the 3rd man said. He was shorter than his friends, maybe 5'10", with sandy hair and nervous eyes. "Maybe we all just calm down and walk away, okay? No harm done." Sarah considered this for exactly 1 second. Then, she looked at the blonde woman, who was still pressed against her car, still shaking. She thought about all the other women these 4 had probably cornered in dark parking lots. All the times they'd walked away after getting what they wanted because nobody had been there to stop them. Too late for that, she said. The fourth man, the one who hadn't spoken yet, apparently decided that retreat was the better part of valor. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing across the asphalt as he sprinted toward the bar's entrance. Sarah let him go. 3 was a manageable number. 4 had been manageable too, but 3 was easier. Sandy hair, and the runner's flight left him alone with Sarah, and he clearly didn't like the odds. His hands were shaking now, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, which was probably the first honest thing any of them had said all night. "Then leave," Sarah replied. "Walk away, get your friends, and go home." For a moment, it looked like he might actually do it. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he took another step back. But then Tommy groaned from the ground, trying to sit up with his good arm, and something in that sound seemed to rekindle the man's anger. "You broke his arm," he accused, as if Sarah had committed some unforgivable crime. "Dislocated his shoulder," Sarah corrected. "And I warned him first. You can't just attack people." The irony of this statement might have been funny under different circumstances. Sarah glanced pointedly at the blonde woman, then back at Sandy hair. "You're right," she said. "You can't." He rushed her then, perhaps thinking that righteous indignation would somehow compensate for his complete lack of training. Sarah sidestepped his charge and helped him along with a gentle push between the shoulder blades. His own momentum carried him into the side of a parked truck with a resounding clang. He bounced off the vehicle and staggered sideways, dazed but not down. Sarah followed up with a precise strike to a pressure point on his neck, not hard enough to cause permanent damage, just enough to short-circuit his nervous system for a few seconds. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward onto his hands, conscious but unable to coordinate his movements. 3 down. The parking lot had gone eerily quiet. Sarah looked around and realized that a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance. Maybe 15 or 20 people, all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to admiration. Someone was definitely filming with their phone. Someone else was talking rapidly into theirs, probably calling 911. Tommy had managed to sit up and was cradling his injured arm. The redhead was still unconscious. Sandy hair was on his hands and knees, shaking his head like a dog trying to clear water from its ears. Sarah walked over to the blonde woman, who was still standing by her car, but no longer shaking. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle now. The woman nodded slowly. "Ah, yes. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." "Don't think about it," Sarah said. "Can you drive? Do you need me to call someone?" "I can drive," the woman said, though her voice was still unsteady. How did you do that? I mean, they were so much bigger than you." Sarah helped her get her car door open. "Size isn't everything," she said simply. "Being bigger just means you have further to fall." In the distance, sirens were approaching. Multiple vehicles from the sound of it. Sarah wasn't surprised. A fight in a crowded parking lot would definitely draw attention, especially one that had ended so decisively. "You should go," Sarah told the blonde woman, "before the police get here. You don't need to be part of this. But you saved me. Shouldn't I stay and tell them what happened?" "They'll have plenty of witnesses," Sarah said, gesturing to the crowd that was still watching from a safe distance. "And I can explain what happened. You've been through enough tonight." The woman looked like she wanted to argue, but then she nodded. "Thank you," she said again. "Really, thank you so much." She got in her car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Sarah alone with 3 groaning attackers and a growing crowd of onlookers. Tommy was trying to stand now, using his good arm to push himself up. "You crazy bitch," he mumbled, his voice thick with pain and alcohol. "You broke my arm." "I told you to stop," Sarah replied calmly. "You chose not to listen. You can't just attack people. This is assault." Sarah looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "You were surrounding a woman in a dark parking lot. You blocked her path to her car. You refused to let her leave when she asked. What exactly do you think that's called?" Before Tommy could answer, the first police car arrived, its red and blue lights painting the scene in alternating colors. 2 officers got out, hands resting on their weapons but not drawing them. They approached cautiously, taking in the scene: 3 men on the ground, 1 woman standing calmly nearby, and a crowd of witnesses watching everything. "Metro Police," the first officer called out. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a serious expression and alert eyes. "Nobody move. We need to understand what happened here." The second officer, an older woman with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd seen everything, began talking to the witnesses while her partner approached Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez. Are you injured?" "No, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm Fina. Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah looked at Tommy, who was still clutching his shoulder and glaring at her with undisguised hatred. She looked at the redhead, who was starting to stir. She looked at Sandy Hair, who was finally able to sit up but still looked confused. Then she looked back at Officer Rodriguez and told him exactly what had happened. The truth. All of it. Officer Rodriguez listened to Sarah's account without interrupting, taking notes in a small pad while his partner, Detective Morrison, interviewed witnesses. The crowd had grown larger as word spread through the bar that something major had happened outside. People were streaming out to see what the commotion was about, their voices creating a low buzz of conversation and speculation. "So you're saying these 4 men were threatening another woman?" Rodriguez asked, glancing down at Tommy, who was now sitting against a car tire, still cradling his shoulder. "That's correct," Sarah said. "They had surrounded her, blocked her path to her car, and refused to let her leave when she asked. When I intervened, they turned their attention to me and became physically aggressive." "That's bullshit," Tommy burst out, his face red with pain and anger. "She attacked us. We were just talking to some girl, and this psycho came out of nowhere and started a fight." Rodriguez looked at him calmly. "Sir, I need you to remain quiet until we're ready to take your statement. You'll have your chance to tell your side." "My side? Look at us. Look at what she did." Tommy gestured with his good arm at his 2 friends, who were now both sitting up but still looking dazed. "She's dangerous. She should be arrested." Morrison approached from the crowd, her expression thoughtful. "Rodriguez, I've got about 15 witnesses here. Want to hear what they're saying? Go ahead." "Unanimous," Morrison said, consulting her own notes. They all saw these 4 men corner a young blonde woman by her car. Multiple witnesses heard them making threatening statements. They described the woman as clearly frightened and trying to get away. Then our subject here approached and asked them to leave the victim alone. She looked directly at Sarah. "They also all agree that these men threatened you directly before any physical contact occurred. Several witnesses heard the apparent leader," she nodded toward Tommy, "make sexually threatening statements toward both you and the original victim." "We were just talking," the redhead protested. He was holding his nose, which was swollen and had stopped bleeding but looked definitely broken. "It's not illegal to talk to people. What about blocking someone's path to their vehicle?" Morrison asked. "What about refusing to allow someone to leave when they've clearly expressed they want to go? What about making sexually explicit threats?" The redhead's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. Morrison turned back to Sarah. "Ma'am, can you tell me about your background? Your training?" Sarah hesitated for a moment. This was always the tricky part. "I serve in the Army for 8 years. 3 tours overseas. I received training in hand-to-hand combat and personal protection." "What was your MOS?" Morrison asked, using the military abbreviation for job classification. 11B initially, Sarah said. "Infantry. Later I cross-trained as 18 series." Morrison's eyebrows went up. "Special Forces?" "Yes, ma'am." Rodriguez whistled softly. "That explains a lot." Tommy struggled to his feet, swaying slightly from alcohol and pain. "I don't care what her background is. She can't just attack people. This is America. You can't use military training on civilians." "Actually," Morrison said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through something, "you can. Under Arizona law, a person is justified in using physical force against another when they reasonably believe it necessary to protect themselves or a third party for what they believe is imminent unlawful physical force or sexual assault." She looked up from her phone. The question is whether the force used was reasonable and proportional to the threat. Given that we have 4 large men under the influence of alcohol making threats against 2 women, she shrugged. Seems reasonable to me. But look what she did to us, Sandy Hare protested. He was standing now, though still unsteady. She could have killed us. But she didn't, Morrison pointed out. Dislocated shoulder, broken nose, possible concussion. No permanent damage. No life-threatening injuries. For someone with her training, I'd say she showed considerable restraint. An ambulance arrived then, followed by another police car. The paramedics began checking the 3 injured men, while the additional officers helped control the crowd and secure the scene. Sarah found herself sitting in the back of a patrol car. Not under arrest, Morrison assured her, just separated from the suspects while they sorted everything out. Through the window, she could see Danny approaching from the bar. He looked concerned and confused, probably wondering why his sister was sitting in a police car. Sarah motioned for him to stay back. The last thing she needed was for him to get involved in this mess. Morrison slid into the front seat of the patrol car and turned to face Sarah. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Did you use more force than necessary? Sarah considered the question carefully. No, ma'am. I used the minimum force required to neutralize the threat. Each technique I used was designed to incapacitate without causing permanent damage. You could have done worse. Yes, much worse. Sarah met her eyes. If I'd wanted to kill them, they'd be dead. If I'd wanted to cripple them, they'd be crippled. I wanted to stop them, so I stopped them. Morrison nodded slowly. I believe you. And I think any reasonable person looking at this situation would come to the same conclusion. For men threatening women in a parking lot, refusing commands to stop, escalating to physical violence. You were completely justified. Does that mean I can go? Almost. I need you to make a formal statement, and we'll need contact information in case the DA wants to follow up. But I don't anticipate any charges being filed against you. Sarah felt relief wash over her. She'd been in enough legal situations to know that even justified self-defense could sometimes lead to complications. Military training was a double-edged sword. It made her more capable of handling threats, but it also made prosecutors nervous about excessive force. Morrison got out of the car and walked over to where the 3 suspects were being treated by paramedics. Sarah could see her talking to them, probably explaining their legal situation. She couldn't hear the conversation, but their body language told her everything she needed to know. Tommy was arguing and gesturing angrily with his good arm. The redhead was holding an ice pack to his nose and looking sullen. Sandy Hare just looked defeated. After a few minutes, Morrison returned. They're going to be fine medically. Tommy needs to go to the hospital to have his shoulder properly examined, but it's not serious. The others can be treated and released. What happens now? Now they get arrested for attempted sexual assault, harassment, and public intoxication. They'll spend a night in jail, probably get released on bond tomorrow. With their records and, yes, we ran them, they all have priors for similar incidents. They're looking at serious charges. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction. Good. The interesting part is that when we searched them, we found this. Morrison held up a small plastic bag containing several pills. Rohypnol, date rape drugs. They weren't just planning to harass that girl. They were planning to drug her. Sarah's jaw tightened. So, if I hadn't intervened, yeah, you probably saved that woman from something much worse than harassment. Morrison leaned forward. Between you and me, I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen what these kinds of predators do when they don't get stopped. You did the right thing tonight. I just did what needed to be done. That's what I'm going to put in my report. Sarah spent the next hour giving her formal statement, providing her contact information, and answering follow-up questions. The crowd gradually dispersed as the excitement died down. The 3 suspects were loaded into separate patrol cars and driven away. Tommy was taken to the hospital under police escort, still complaining loudly about his treatment. By the time she was finally free to go, it was nearly 2 in the morning. Danny was waiting by her car, having somehow convinced the police to let him stay. He looked worried and proud at the same time. "Jesus, Sarah," he said as she approached. "Everyone in the bar is talking about what you did. They're saying you took down 4 guys by yourself." "3," Sarah corrected. "One of them ran away." "Still, I mean, I knew you were tough, but—" He shook his head in amazement. Mom and Dad would have been proud. Sarah felt the unexpected tightness in her throat. Their parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, just after she'd left the Army. Danny had been 18 then, just starting college. She'd promised them she'd take care of him, look after him, make sure he stayed out of trouble. "They would have worried," she said finally. "They always worried when I had to fight. But they would have been proud too. You saved that girl. You stopped those guys from hurting her." Sarah nodded, but she was thinking about something else. Something Morrison had mentioned about the suspect's prior records. Similar incidents. How many other women had they attacked? How many times had they gotten away with it because no one was there to stop them? "Come on," she said, opening her car door. "Let's go home." As they drove through the quiet streets, Danny chattering excitedly about what the witnesses had told him, Sarah found herself thinking about the blonde woman. As she made it home safely, would she be okay? Would she report what almost happened to her? Or would she try to forget it? Sarah hoped she would remember. Remember that sometimes, when everything seems hopeless, help can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the quiet person standing nearby is exactly the person you need. And sometimes when predators think they've found easy prey, they discover that they've made the biggest mistake of their lives. The city lights blurred past her windows as Sarah Chun drove home, wondering what she would tell her students on Monday when they asked her how her weekend had been. Somehow, she didn't think, "I hospitalized 3 would-be rapists in a parking lot," was appropriate classroom conversation. But then, again, maybe it was exactly the kind of story young women needed to hear. Someone in the parking lot crowd had posted cell phone footage of social media around 3 a.m., and by sunrise it had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. The quality wasn't great. It was dark, filmed from a distance, and shaky, but it clearly showed Sarah taking down 3 large men in rapid succession. The audio was better than the video, picking up her calm warning and the attackers' threatening responses. Sarah discovered this when her phone started buzzing at 7 a.m. with notifications from apps she rarely used. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Friend requests from strangers. Her email inbox was overflowing with interview requests from local news stations and blog writers. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in yesterday's clothes, scrolling through dozens of messages with growing disbelief. Someone had identified her as a former Army Ranger, though she couldn't figure out how. The story was being shared with headlines like "Female Veteran Destroys 4 Attackers" and "Woman Gives Parking Lot Predators Exactly What They Deserved." Most of the comments were positive. People praising her actions, calling her a hero, sharing their own stories of harassment and assault. But there were negative ones too. People questioning whether she'd used excessive force. Others making crude jokes about the men getting beaten up by a woman. A few suggesting the whole thing was staged for social media attention. Her doorbell rang at 8:30. Sarah looked through the peephole to see a woman with perfectly styled hair holding a microphone, standing next to a man with a professional video camera. Behind them, a news van was parked on her quiet residential street. Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Chun? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm standing outside your house right now, and I was hoping we could speak with you about what happened last night. Our viewers would love to hear your side of the story." Sarah hung up without responding. She closed all the blinds in her house and made coffee, trying to process what was happening. She'd expected some attention from the incident. It wasn't every day that someone single-handedly took down multiple attackers in a crowded parking lot. But this level of interest was unexpected and unwelcome. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Detective Morrison. "Miss Chun, I wanted to give you a heads up. The story about last night has gotten some media attention. We've had several news outlets contact the department asking for details." "So, I noticed," Sarah said dryly, "there's a news crew on my front lawn. I'm sorry about that. Look, you're not required to talk to anyone. You haven't been charged with anything, and the investigation is ongoing. If you want to avoid the media, that's completely your right. What about the 3 suspects? Arraigned this morning. All 3 pled not guilty, but with the witness statements and the video evidence, their lawyers are already talking about plea deals. The DA is pushing for maximum sentences. Apparently, they've been trying to nail these guys for months. Sarah felt a spark of interest. Months? Yeah, there have been at least 6 similar incidents reported in the past year. Same pattern. Young women leaving bars alone, getting cornered in parking lots or isolated areas. But the victims were always too scared or traumatized to pursue charges, or the suspect had alibis from their friends. Last night was the first time someone fought back and won. And the first time was caught on video. That too. The footage is actually pretty damaging to their case. It clearly shows them threatening you and the original victim refusing to back down when asked and escalating to physical violence first. After Morrison hung up, Sarah tried to return to her normal weekend routine. She graded papers, cleaned the house, did laundry. But every few minutes her phone would buzz with another notification, another interview request, another comment on the spreading video. At 11 a.m., there was a soft knock on her back door. Sarah looked out to see Danny standing on her patio, looking excited and slightly overwhelmed. I parked 3 streets over and came through the Henderson's yard, he said as she let him in. There are like 5 news vans out front now. 5. And some blogger with a professional camera set up. I think CNN might be coming too. He paused. Sarah, this is getting crazy. Everyone at school is talking about you. You're like famous. Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee and considered this development. Fame had never been something she'd wanted or pursued. Her military service had been motivated by duty and family tradition. Both her grandfathers had served, and she'd felt called to continue that legacy. Her teaching career had been about giving back to her community in a quieter way. Neither role had prepared her for media attention. Were people saying? She asked. Mostly good things. Everyone thinks you're a badass. Some of my friends want to know if you give self-defense lessons. Danny hesitated. But there are also people saying you went too far. That you could have just called the police instead of fighting. The police wouldn't have arrived in time, Sarah said. And those men had drugs on them. If I just called 911 and walked away, that woman would have been assaulted or worse. I know that. And most people know that. But you know how social media is. There's always someone who wants to argue about everything. Sarah's laptop chimed with a new email. This one was different from the media requests. The sender was listed as Jessica Martinez, and the subject line read, "Thank you from last night's victim." Sarah opened it immediately. Ms. Chun, I hope you don't mind that I tracked down your email address. I'm the woman you saved last night. I wanted to reach out privately before this story gets any bigger. First, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you did. I've been replaying that night over and over, and I know that if you hadn't been there, something terrible would have happened to me. The police told me about the drugs they found, and I can't stop thinking about what those men were planning. Second, I wanted you to know that I've been contacted by several news outlets wanting to interview me. I've declined all of them so far because I think this should be your story to tell, not mine. But I wanted to ask if you'd like me to make a statement supporting your actions. I'm a law student at ASU, and I understand how these situations can get complicated legally. If it would help your case to have the victim publicly supporting what you did, I'm willing to do that. Thank you again for being brave enough to step in when you saw something wrong. You're a hero, whether you want to be called that or not. Sarah read the email twice, then forwarded it to Danny. He read it over her shoulder and whistled softly. Wow, she wants to go public supporting you. Apparently. Sarah thought about this. She'd wondered about the blonde woman all morning, hoping she was okay, hoping she wouldn't blame herself for what almost happened. Getting this email was a relief. Her phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a number she recognized. Her principal, Dr. Elizabeth Warren. Sarah, I hope you're okay. I've been seeing news reports about some incident last night involving you. I'm fine, Dr. Warren. There was a situation in a parking lot, but I wasn't injured. The reports I'm seeing suggest you were involved in some kind of altercation. Can you give me the basic facts? Sarah explained what had happened, keeping the details clinical and factual. When she finished, there was a long pause. "Well," Dr. Warren said finally, "I can't say I'm surprised. You've always struck me as someone who wouldn't stand by and watch injustice happen. But, Sarah, this is going to create some complications for the school." "What kind of complications?" "Media attention, for one thing. If this story keeps growing, reporters are going to want to interview your students, other teachers, people at the school. The district gets nervous about that kind of publicity." Sarah felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. "Are you saying there might be consequences for my job?" "I'm saying the district is going to want to review the situation. Make sure everything was handled appropriately. You're not in trouble. From what you've told me, you clearly acted in defense of another person. But there will be questions about whether this reflects the image the school wants to project. The image of standing up to criminals. The image of using violence to solve problems." Dr. Warren's tone was sympathetic but firm. "I know that's not fair, Sarah. I know you did the right thing. But school districts are risk-averse, especially when it comes to anything involving physical altercations." After the call ended, Sarah sat staring at her phone, processing this new wrinkle. She'd spent 6 years building her teaching career, earning the respect of students and colleagues, creating a life she was proud of. The idea that one night of doing the right thing might jeopardize all of that was deeply frustrating. Danny was watching her with concern. "What did she say?" "The school district is going to review the situation." Sarah made air quotes with her fingers. "They're worried about the publicity." "That's bullshit. You saved someone. You stopped criminals. How is that bad publicity?" "Because I used violence to do it. And schools have zero-tolerance policies about violence, even when it happens off campus, even when it's completely justified." Sarah walked to her front window and peered through the blinds. The media presence had indeed grown. She counted at least 6 news vans now, plus several cars that probably belonged to reporters or bloggers. A small crowd of neighbors and curiosity seekers had gathered on the sidewalk across the street. Her phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Marcus Rivera, an old Army buddy who'd served with her in Afghanistan. "Holy shit, Sarah. Just saw the video online. You haven't lost a step. Proud of you for standing up to those assholes. Let me know if you need anything, backup, legal support, character witnesses, whatever. Semper Fi." The message made her smile for the first time all morning. Marcus had been her squad leader during her second tour, a steady and reliable soldier who'd saved her life more than once. If word was reaching her old military contacts, the story was spreading further than she'd imagined. She spent the next hour reading through more messages from former service members, all expressing support and pride in her actions. It was a reminder that while some people might question her methods, the people who'd served alongside her understood the realities of violence and the necessity of sometimes fighting back. But as the morning wore on, Sarah found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future. The media attention would eventually die down, but the consequences might linger. Her teaching career might be in jeopardy. Her quiet, private life was certainly over, at least for now. On the other hand, 3 predators were in jail. A young woman was safe. And maybe, just maybe, other would-be attackers would think twice before targeting someone they assumed was helpless. Sarah Chun made her decision. She was going to tell her story. Sarah opened her front door at exactly 2 p.m., stepping out to face a wall of cameras and microphones thrust toward her like weapons. The questions came all at once, a cacophony of voices competing for her attention. "Ms. Chun, how do you respond to critics who say you used excessive force? Is it true you were trained as a special forces operator? What would you say to other women facing similar situations? Do you regret your actions last night?" Sarah raised one hand, and the crowd quieted slightly. She'd changed into a simple blue blouse and black slacks, professional but not formal, confident but not aggressive. She'd spent an hour planning what she wanted to say, knowing that her words would be analyzed and replayed countless times. "I'll make a brief statement," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "Then I'll answer a few questions." The cameras focused on her face as she took a breath and began. "Last night, I witnessed 4 men threatening and intimidating a young woman in a parking lot. When I asked them to leave her alone, they turned their aggression toward me and made it clear they had no intention of letting either of us leave safely. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize that threat and ensure both our safety. She paused, looking directly into the closest camera. I want to be clear about something. I didn't look for this confrontation. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But when you see someone in danger and you have the ability to help, you have a choice to make. You can walk away and hope someone else will handle it, or you can step up and do what needs to be done. A reporter near the front called out. Some people are saying you could have just called the police instead of taking matters into your own hands. The police are an excellent resource when you have time to wait for them, Sarah replied. But assault happens in seconds, not minutes. Those men were armed with date rape drugs and had clear intent to harm. By the time police arrived, it would have been too late. Ms. Chun, there are reports that you served in special forces. Did your military training influence how you handled this situation? Sarah chose her words carefully. My military experience taught me to assess threats quickly and respond proportionally. It also taught me that sometimes the only thing standing between an innocent person and harm is someone willing to act. Another voice from the crowd. Do you think other women should follow your example? I think everyone should be prepared to defend themselves and others when necessary. That might mean taking self-defense classes, staying aware of your surroundings, or simply being willing to speak up when you see something wrong. Not everyone needs to fight, but everyone can do something. The questions continued for another 15 minutes. Sarah answered them calmly and directly, refusing to be drawn into speculation about her attacker's motives or her own future. When she finally went back inside, she felt like she'd handled it as well as possible. Within hours, clips from her impromptu press conference were circulating online alongside the original parking lot video. The response was immediate and polarized. Social media exploded with debates about self-defense, women's safety, military training, and the use of force. #SarahChun began trending nationally. The support was overwhelming. Thousands of women shared their own stories of harassment and assault, praising Sarah for fighting back. Veterans posted messages of solidarity and pride. Self-defense instructors reported surges in class enrollment. But the criticism was intense too. Some commentators questioned whether a trained soldier should ever use their skills on civilians. Others suggested she was a vigilante seeking attention. A few made ugly comments about women who tried to act like men. The real test came Monday morning at school. Sarah arrived early, hoping to avoid the media circus that had set up in the parking lot. She parked in her usual spot and walked toward the building, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters who'd apparently been waiting since dawn. Inside, the hallways were buzzing with excitement. Students clustered around phones, watching and rewatching the parking lot video. When they saw her, many broke into spontaneous applause. Others stared in awe, as if she'd suddenly become a celebrity. Ms. Chun, called out Maria Santos, one of her advanced chemistry students. That was so amazing what you did. My mom saw it on the news, and she said you're a hero. Other students crowded around, all talking at once, asking questions about the fight, about her military service, about whether she could teach them to fight like that. Sarah found herself both touched by their enthusiasm and concerned about the attention. All right, everyone, she said with a smile. Let's save the excitement for chemistry class. We have a test on molecular bonding today, remember? The groans that followed were reassuringly normal. Her first period class was actually her best in weeks. The students were engaged and focused, perhaps viewing her with new respect. During the molecular bonding lesson, one student asked if there was any connection between chemical bonds and the joint locks she'd used on her attackers. Sarah was impressed by the question and spent a few minutes explaining the principles of leverage and mechanical advantage, drawing parallels between molecular structures and human anatomy. The morning proceeded normally until the principal's secretary appeared at her classroom door during third period. Ms. Chun, Dr. Warren needs to see you in her office when you have a moment. Sarah's heart sank. She'd been expecting this call. but hoping it might not come. Dr. Warren's office was uncomfortably formal when Sarah arrived. The principal sat behind her large desk, flanked by two people Sarah didn't recognize, a stern-looking woman in a business suit and a nervous man with a legal pad. "Sarah, please sit down. I'd like you to meet Janet Morrison from the district office and David Chun, no relation, from our legal department." The introductions were polite but cold. Sarah could feel the tension in the room before anyone spoke. "Ms. Chun," Janet Morrison began, "I'm sure you understand why we're here. Friday night's incident has created a significant media situation for the district. We need to discuss how to move forward. What exactly are you concerned about?" Sarah asked. "Well, there's the publicity, for one thing. We've had reporters calling all morning asking about our military-trained teacher and whether students are safe in your classroom. There are also questions about liability. What happens if a student is injured during one of your classes? People might claim you're prone to violence." David Chin looked up from his legal pad. "From a legal standpoint, the district is concerned about potential lawsuits. If someone decides to sue you personally over Friday night's incident, they might also name the school district as a defendant. That's a risk we have to consider." Sarah felt her temper rising, but kept her voice level. "Are you saying the district disapproves of my actions Friday night?" Dr. Warren shifted uncomfortably. "No one is questioning whether you did the right thing, Sarah, but we have to think about the broader implications for the school environment." "What broader implications?" "That students might feel safer knowing their teachers will protect them if necessary. That young women might be inspired to stand up for themselves." Janet Morrison's expression didn't change. "Ms. Chun, the district has a zero-tolerance policy regarding violence. While we understand that Friday night's incident occurred off school property and involved unusual circumstances, it still reflects on your judgment and your suitability for working with children." "Violence." Sarah stood up, her patience finally exhausted. "Four men with date rape drugs cornered a helpless woman in a dark parking lot. They threatened her, threatened me, and made it clear they intended to commit sexual assault. I stopped them with minimal force and no permanent injuries. That's not violence. That's justice." "Ms. Chun, please sit down," Dr. Warren said quietly. "No one is questioning your motives. But the district has policies we have to follow. What exactly are you proposing?" The three administrators exchanged glances. Morrison spoke first. "We think it would be best if you took a leave of absence while this situation settles down. Paid leave, of course. Give the media attention time to fade. Let the legal situation resolve itself. Then, we can reassess your position." Sarah stared at them in disbelief. "You want me to hide until people forget that I stopped four rapists?" "We want to protect the district's interests," Morrison replied. "And honestly, we think it might be in your best interest, too. This level of media attention can't be comfortable for you. And if I refuse?" David Chun cleared his throat. "Well, we have to consider whether your presence at school creates a disruptive environment. District policy allows for immediate suspension in cases where an employee's conduct, even off-campus conduct, interferes with the educational mission." Sarah looked at each of them in turn. Dr. Warren at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. The other two just stared back with bureaucratic indifference. "I see," Sarah said finally. "So my options are voluntary exile or involuntary exile." "It's not exile," Dr. Warren protested. "It's just a temporary measure until things calm down." Sarah thought about her students, who'd been so excited to see her this morning. She thought about Maria Santos and her mother, who'd called her a hero. She thought about Jessica Martinez, the law student who'd written to thank her. She thought about all the women who'd shared their own stories of harassment and fear. Then she thought about the three men sitting in jail, and the fourth one who'd run away but was probably watching this unfold on the news, waiting to see if standing up to predators would be punished or rewarded. "No," she said simply. "Excuse me." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "No, I won't take leave. I won't hide. I did nothing wrong, and I won't act like I did." Sarah stood again, this time moving toward the door. "If you want to suspend me, you'll have to make that decision yourselves. But I won't make it easier for you by volunteering." She paused at the door and looked back.